These are babies who were under 4 months of age, whose parents did not give the vitamin K, and the children came in with bleeds in the brain, and the other child had bleeds all throughout the spinal column. Well, we have to understand that vaccine hesitancy has existed for decades and centuries. This is not new information, but whenever you discuss anything in medicine, you should be talking about benefit outweighing risk. That terminology is way more accurate than saying 100% safe, because there's nothing in medicine that is 100% safe. All of this is on my conscience and on my integrity as a practicing doctor, that I would give the advice that I'd give myself, and that I am going to give the recommendation that I do for my own kids. When you actually break it down, this should not be political. Science should not be political, but it has become that, and that is a travesty. I hesitated because what if we gave the vaccine and it increased, obviously his seizure threshold, and all of a sudden he had a seizure, and I didn't want to see that again. But I would never let your child do what I wouldn't do for my own kid.
Have very different viewpoints on many things.
But a lot of these issues are American issues. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
Welcome back to Elevated Thoughts, the podcast that's working to restore productive discourse between left and right. Today's guest is someone I think a lot of new parents are really going to connect with. Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician and the voice behind Peds Doc Talk, where she breaks down everything from baby sleep to vaccines in a way that's honest, science-based, and, well, actually helpful. So as two first-time dads, Mike and I have had our fair share of questions, and Dr. Mona's become a go-to resource for parents who just want real answers without the panic and without the guilt. So Dr. Mona, I wanted to say my wife has been following you before I had even heard your name, so you are all over the internet. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well, and what an intro. Yes, I am beloved by moms, dads. I love when I get to chat with dads, because on social, I tend to have a lot of women followers and their mothers. So when I can talk to dads, especially on podcasts or shows, it's such an honor. So thank you, because obviously dads and moms are equally important in a baby's life. So this is a great time to be here.
Yeah, I think it's actually a little bit of a void in the marketplace,
Yes.
probably. You have a lot of these conversations, and we've had them on this show about the differences between the toxic or the productive masculinity. But both of us are boy dads, and so we have to balance what is that toxic or that actual masculinity. And they're still so young, but maybe what we're doing now is actually very important. So before we jump into everything, though, why don't you just give us a little bit of background on yourself? What inspired you to get into pediatrics? That's even what it's called? And then, tell us the history of Peds Doc Talk.
Thank you. Well, I love the name of your show, Elevated Thoughts. It's literally probably aligned with why I started my channel. It all started as an Instagram account back in 2019. Before I became a mother, I was actually trying to conceive, and it wasn't happening as quick as I had thought. I'm a type A. I'm like, oh, we'll start trying and it's going to work. And it took a few months, which is very normal. And in that time, I was like, I need to do something to get my mind off of this. And I'm like, okay, well, what do I want to do? And then for a long time, I just wanted to have an educational platform where I can get online and share the information I have. And so many families in my office would come and say, hey, Dr. Mona, where can I get what you just said online? Like, I listened to what you said, but where can I read it? And I'm like, well, it doesn't exist because I'm not the one creating it. So days went by, and finally I came home, and it was a lot of misinformation coming to my office, a lot of people confused about what they read online. And I was like, I need to elevate my thoughts onto a platform here, And I said, I'm just going to start. And I was overthinking it. I was saying, like, I have to have like a 1-month plan on what I'm going to post. I have to do X, Y, and Z. And finally I was like, let's just do this. And I just started posting on Instagram. And, 6 years later, it's blossomed into a podcast, which was the next year, courses, a YouTube channel, brand partnerships, media, and really with this goal of taking all the information you hear as parents, whether it's on social, whether it's from your pediatrician, and talking about it. So that's the inspiration of the name. Peds Doc Talk is, how is this pediatrician doctor talking about things in a way that I believe every parent can understand and that every parent should understand so that they can actually make confident choices. And so I'm really big on communication, not only with parents, but also with how we communicate with our children. And so you'll see a lot of that in my content. It's child health, development, parenting, anything you'd really come to a pediatrician for is what you're going to get on all of my channels.
Yeah, so I think we've had some recent conversations, and it unfortunately there's influencers on the internet who maybe get the fame that goes to their head a little bit, and they take note of how many followers they have. So we had a few gentlemen on our show regarding archaeology, and we are trying to debunk some of the information around that. And unfortunately, for a long time, when you ignore these certain voices, you kind of cede the space to them, and then they take up all the air in the room, and that's the
Yeah.
last thing that a lot of parents have. So what I really appreciate with your channel is just the way you know, and you give it in a very digestible and deliverable format. And actually, what really turned me on to you was when I first found your vaccine guide, because
Oh,
even as
love
a
it.
parent who was very confident that vaccines are I want to make sure I get on the schedule properly, and I want my child protected when we go out into public, things like that. But I think your story really struck with me personally, because even when you knew all that information, even you as a pediatrician, you still have the hesitancy sometimes when you have to undergo that first time you prick your child, because you just kind
Yeah.
of have that, like, tugs on your heartstring. So what is it like as being a pediatrician and a parent? I think that's kind of two roles that are difficult to juggle, but you seem to do it very well.
It is such a beautiful thing, and people often ask, like, how has this being a pediatrician made you a mother, like a better mom, whatever, and how has it also been the other way, right? How has being a
Right.
mom impacted your pediatrician world? And I would say it's such a symbiotic relationship, and it's so beautiful, and each of them impact the other, right? I am a better mother because I'm a pediatrician and I know the things that I do, but I will say that the other way has been more impactful, right? That I am a better mother, a better pediatrician because of the experience I've had as a mom. And, giving an example of what you just said, that vaccine guide. And in that guide, I talk about the common questions people have that I've heard in my office, that I've seen online. And I'm actually doing another revision of it this summer. So it's going to be even longer than what people already know it to be. And my point of this is that it's a free resource forever. I'm not going to ever put it behind a paywall because I believe that this information should be free to the public. And I want people to hear my voice and hear how I would talk to you if you were in my office, right? The concerns you may have. And I myself, had a concern with the vaccine when my son was born. So he had a stroke and a seizure, and we had a very traumatic delivery. He had wires, all these interventions,
Right.
more
Right.
than I think a lot of adults would ever have. And when it came time to his 2-month vaccines, I knew that it was something I wanted to do, but with those vaccines can come a risk of febrile seizures, which I know to be true. It's very low, but it's a reality. And when it came time to actually vaccinate, knowing he has a seizure history, knowing that he was fine with his seizures on medications, I hesitated because what if we gave the vaccine and it increased, obviously his seizure threshold, and all of a sudden he had a seizure. And I didn't want to see that again because I was
Yeah.
the one who saw him the first time with the seizure. So it's one of those examples. I thought about the benefit risk. I thought about the fact that this is rare, that febrile seizures are rare. I've seen them. The children make good recoveries, and that I'm going to go with rare. I'm going to go with what I've seen as a practicing clinician and what I see from the evidence. And that's really guided me on my education, right? When I talk, and you all know that because you follow me, and your wife, Cooper, you were saying, knows that too. But
I
it is.
follow you as well
Oh,
now,
good.
for the
Yeah, it
record.
is. It is so important, and for your listeners as well, that I can't make this. I can't make anyone believe what I'm saying, but it comes from such balance and integrity for the words that I say. Like every content piece is scrutinized with a comb, right? I write everything and then I look at it again, and I even ask my team, like, how does this feel to you? Like, what do you think? Is this going to go well? Like, do you guys understand what I'm trying to say? And we work on it. There's a whole process behind it because I want people not to feel dismissed, but also stick to facts, right? Stick to what I know, not only from evidence, but from experience. Because I've now been practicing 10 years. It's a long time in this field. And I have seen rare side effects, but I've also seen what those viruses and bacteria can do if we don't vaccinate, right? So I'm always looking at benefit and risk for anything I'm recommending, whether it's sleep training, whether we're doing, vaccines. It is all the things that I look at. And it's such an important part of my platform that people know that that's what they're getting, whatever they're reading or consuming on my channels.
I mean, just your answer there really affirms it, right?
Yeah,
Because you've
thank you.
given your personal anecdote of having vaccine hesitancy. And the shtick of our show is Mike is the Democrat and I'm the Republican in
Okay,
a
cool.
way. And we've kind of morphed more towards the middle as we've now had almost 60 of these episodes. But that's what's kind of proliferated on the right wing, right? Is this anti-vaccine movement. And I was never really privy to it. I was never really a big guy that goes to the doctor, to be honest. But now that we've had our son almost 2 years ago, it was in the back of my head like, wait a minute, all of these influencers I listen to are telling me don't take these vaccines and don't give them to your kids. So as we see folks like RFK and Nicole
Yeah.
Shanahan that really want to dive into movements like the Make America Healthy Again and actually deliberately talking about mercury in vaccines and potential links to autism, I'm wondering if, in your opinion, one, did this COVID with the mRNA vaccines, where it may have been a little bit of valid concern about these vaccines, did you experience that it spilled over into the broader market of vaccines, which is obviously probably that net negative? And then do you think it's valuable for MAHA to invest time and energy in actually chasing these theories down and coming up with answers?
So I love this question. And I think, well, we have to understand that vaccine hesitancy has existed for decades and centuries. This is not new information, but,
Okay.
the late 1990s is when we really saw the start of that vaccine hesitancy in our generation. And I say that because it has existed. But 1999 was when the Andrew Wakefield study came out, which was now retracted, about the autism vaccine link. And that's when, celebrities like Jenny McCarthy were going on different news shows, and going and talking about the anti-vax movement. And then social media came into play. And now with the rise of social media, we have now just seen a lot of voices that are not always the correct voices coming out and spreading the misinformation, including now on the highest level, which is the Health and Human Service Secretary. And so I do believe, like you said, I think the pandemic really opened up a lot of cracks in the foundation of so many different areas of the American system, right? We saw cracks in the healthcare system, we saw cracks in the education system, and we also saw cracks in the way people consume information from the media, right? And one of the biggest missteps that happened in the pandemic, and I am aware of it, I think it was a huge problem, is the way the communication happened surrounding the vaccine. Right? Meaning there was a lot of extreme language. This will protect. It is 100% safe. When we know, and I've always discussed this, that whenever you discuss anything in medicine, you should be talking about benefit outweighing risk. That terminology is way more accurate than saying 100% safe, because there's nothing in medicine that is 100% safe. You could take Tylenol and have an allergic reaction. You could take a food, right? Like eat a food and have an allergic reaction. You could have a surgery, right? And have a complication. So when we talk about any intervention, including vaccination or prescription, it should be a clinician and it should be a patient or a parent understanding why this is beneficial versus risky. And what happened with the COVID vaccine communication is that there was a lot of that extreme language. There was a lot of flip-flopping. And why that existed was because we were seeing in real time how to handle a public health emergency. We had never seen that in our lifetime. And I'm pretty sure when the Spanish flu came out in like the 1900s, that there was a lot of back and forth also, but there wasn't social media to add fuel to the flame of like, well, look at what this person's saying, and now look at what this person. So it is like that. When a new novel virus comes out, we are going to, and when I say we, the scientific community is going to do its best to find a way to stop deaths or stop morbidity, right? And my husband's an ER doctor. I was on a front line. I will never deny that early on, the benefit of that vaccine outweighed any risk. It was totally there. And I see that because my husband was intubating so many individuals that were unvaccinated from COVID, and some of them were dying, right? And we saw that. That wasn't fake. That was real. He would come home with fear from this because everyone was dying in his ER, and so many people were super sick, and these were healthy individuals as well. But now we know the virus has evolved, right? And our thoughts can evolve. I currently do not get any boosters. My kids don't get the boosters. And this is because the virus has evolved, not because I don't believe in the vaccine. It's because we look at, we've had COVID, even though we've had the vaccine. The virus isn't impacting the hospitals as much as we have. We are otherwise healthy individuals. And that is me also giving an example of making balanced decision-making, but not spreading misinformation like RFK Jr. or members of the ACIP committee saying, the COVID mRNA is harmful and it alters DNA. That is misinformation. What I'm saying is informed decision making is I know all the facts and I made a choice for my family, but that doesn't mean I'm going to shame someone who didn't get the COVID vaccine because I get it. It evolves. It's different. And I think that's how we should be approaching, especially the COVID vaccine, because of the fact that there is a little more nuance to me than any of the other vaccines, given it's new and given that the virus has evolved in a less severe way.
I think you hit you hit it perfectly there. How you handle it with empathy, I think, is key here because people can look at facts, figures, statistics, and surely if you look at the benefit versus risk reward ratio, it's usually in medicine, the vaccine, it's almost always the vaccine, it offers more protection than the risks that are involved. But for most people, they're not on the fence. They kind of have a narrative in their head. But there are a lot of folks out there who are not on the fence and they're just kind of confused and they're just looking for just some answers and they're easily influenceable. And unfortunately, the internet space harbors attention-getting, folks on there, and they will gravitate towards those account firsts. What I've really appreciated, I guess, is the bedside manner that you've brought to your account on the profile is because it's that empathy that you can reach people, if you, without that kind of judgment, right? Like a judgment-free zone, I think is what's key because most people feel that. They feel that they've already been judged, the conversation's been shut down. And I think what are some moments you've had in your practice where you've kind of had to, I don't want to say confront is the wrong word with parents, but just address some information kind of head on and you were able to, assuage their concerns? What was that like?
I love that. And I will be honest, my approach has evolved in the last 10 years. And I think it was the pandemic that made me turn. From a personal level, my sister is an anti-vaxxer, meaning she doesn't vaccinate and she also spreads the misinformation. That's how that's the terminology I'd like to use for the purpose of this conversation.
Right.
Anti-vaxxer, I'm putting it in quotes if you can't see what I'm doing. That is the person who doesn't vaccinate and is spreading the misinformation that this thing is harmful, that if you get it, it's poison, all of that stuff. That actually caused a huge rift in our relationship because at that time, my husband was seeing a lot of deaths and I was on the front line and I'm like, this isn't a lie. Like I'm telling you right now, like I wouldn't be lying about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the vaccine hesitant, vaccine curious individuals. These are people that are the large majority of those that are not vaccinating. And then there are people that are like, give me everything. Whatever vaccine you have, shoot me up, right? There's three different groups there. I would say I fall between the give me everything to the vaccine curious group. I'm actually not the complete, because I didn't get the COVID vaccine for my kids, right? Like I'm in that group that leans more towards give me everything, but also I get why people have questions. It's a reality. And so I would say the biggest way I've changed this conversation is meeting them with facts, context, and what, why, and what if we don't do this, right? And that is where the conversation leads, right? It's the calm, respectful conversation. Using an example, most recently, I had a family who was worried about the routine vaccines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to him about it. I'm like, the first question I asked is, what are you hearing and what are your concerns? Versus, I don't care what you're reading. It doesn't matter. Everything's wrong. They tell me their response. Where did you read that? Where did you get that information? Not in a judgmental way, but like curiosity. They tell me, I've just heard so many things about autism or heard about this, that, or the other. And then it's about the facts, right? And I validate first and I say, I think we can both agree that me and you both want the same thing for our children. We both want them to be safe. We both want them to be developing on their own trajectory, and we both want the best for them. And I think we can both agree. And my job is to tell you what I think is the best for my children and also your child and my patients in my office. And that is to get the vaccines on schedule and to do it as I would recommend. But what are your thoughts about that? I don't know. Maybe I want to do one at a time. I'm open to that. I'd rather have a family do one at a time than not get them at all.
Zero
So
at a time.
a lot of those conversations have fallen into I want to do them, I just don't want to do them as fast. And I'm okay with that. I literally walk them through a plan. These are curtailed. There's no science behind it. It's literally hey, how many do you want to do today? And they come up with whatever number because that's the number they want. Love it. How about we do these two today? And in 1 week, you come back for the next one. And then we catch up. And then once the 4-month visit, you can see how everything went, which I know they're going to do great. And then we can start that series over. I have turned so many more parents into vaccinators by having that sort of discord of like, what is what is the plan here? Have I had some families say, I don't want to do it? Absolutely. And it's hard for me. And I tell them, I'm like, I can still see you. I love having you as a patient, but I also want you to know that I'm always going to recommend them at every visit. And if that gets annoying to you, you have to decide if it's too much for you, because it is my integrity on the line as well. It is also my license. If I find out that that child in a measles outbreak didn't get the measles vaccine and is now hospitalized because I know how effective that measles vaccine is, that's on my conscience. And that's what I'm saying when I give this advice, is that all of this is on my conscience and on my integrity as a practicing doctor, that I would give the advice that I'd give myself, and that I am going to give the recommendation that I do for my own kids. And once parents hear that like, I've had many moms cry because they feel like these doctors are just holier than thou, like they're just coming down and saying these sort of things, but that they don't see them. And I say, I get it. Like, but I would never let your child do what I wouldn't do for my own kid. I would never recommend that, because I'm not in the business to do that. I care for my kids in my office as I care for my own children, in terms of wanting the best for them, wanting them outside of the hospital, wanting them to be running around and developing on their trajectory. That is a goal I think every parent wants for their child, wherever they are in this world. And I think we can meet our families there with a little more compassion and just a little bit more cooperation and what that can look like. And it's hard because there's a lot of stress in this. There's a lot of assumption, whether it's from the patient thinking that the doctor won't listen, or maybe the doctor saying, you're not going to listen. What's the point of having this conversation? And to be quite frank, I have been there. I used to be that doctor. I used to be the one that turned that away and said, well, you know what? I'm not going to see you then. And I don't want to have this conversation. You're just an anti-vaxxer. When now I'm like, let's find out what you're saying. And if you are spreading misinformation, I'm going to squash that. And I've had women, like moms, like slam papers down and say, I'm not talking about vaccines. And I say, listen, I have to talk about them. So you can listen or you can leave. And many of them have walked out my door, but I can't not have that conversation. And if people are being rude to myself or my staff, you bet I'm going to stand up for my team and not take that sitting down, because that is not fair to my team, and that's not fair to myself, who is educated in this area and who feels like I can give this with guidance with a lot of credibility.
Well, it just is very obvious that you lead with empathy. It's pouring out of you.
Oh, thank you.
The way that you communicate with your patient sounds very validating, which I think makes them more open to considering the alternative side. But I also would say that I understand nowadays that there's probably more and more diagnostic testing and more prognoses without maybe an actual reason. For example, we're assigning or we're giving antibiotics, which are now maybe not always required, or there's been changing studies I've seen recently about introducing peanuts here and there and here and there. So I guess I'm curious, if the government were to compel, let's say, these vaccines, do you draw a line there? Because the science is always changing, and all of these, you mentioned it a few times, right? The clinician and the patient and the parents need to have this conversation together. I'm wondering if this government intervention goes a step too far in your mind, because why do they get to have that say and not me?
I think it's very interesting, and let's talk about the hypocrisy, that when there was government intervention in the COVID pandemic, where we were starting to mandate the vaccine for travel, which, by the way, made sense at the beginning of the pandemic. I want to be very clear that from a public health standpoint, because of the way that virus was acting, it made sense to protect the greater good to have the mandates. Do I believe in mandates now? No. But the same people who were against the mandates at that time are now wanting the government to get involved in all these vaccine interventions, which I find very hypocritical, right? Because now it's fitting their narrative. And I want to be clear. I think a review of the childhood vaccine schedule is not a bad idea. Like, go, enjoy. But the negative of that is that, and if you can see it if you watch the ACIP meetings, which is the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, they recently met and they all approved this new RSV antibody. And it was very interesting because so many of us were like, that's surprising. Why did they support a vaccine or an antibody? They're so anti-vax, right? And it was because someone on the panel had a child who was hospitalized with RSV. So of
Right.
course they get it. But my fear is that if the government starts now saying, let's look into all of these illnesses and if the vaccine's really needed, so many of these diseases are now eradicated or close to being eradicated because of vaccines. We don't see it because of the vaccine programs, right? So now
Right.
if you're looking at Hep B data and you're like, well, no kid's getting Hep B, let's just take it off the schedule. That intervention doesn't make sense because that's not guided by public health. That's not guided by looking at what impact that vaccine has had on society, right? That is more effective evidence-based information, right? So my worry is when the government gets involved in any capacity, let's say if you're a Democrat, Republican, there is a lot of bias, right? There has to be some neutral body, which is the ACIP, by the way, and now it's not because they've put all of the cronies on there. It's not an unbiased. It used to be a very nonpartisan organization, right, that decides this. And now we are having people who are voicing one side of the panel. And that's really concerning because we're not getting those sort of conversations as much as we normally would in those committees about benefit, risk. And I've sat in on those meetings during COVID. They are very intense and very detailed, more than I think anyone could ever imagine. And that is my concern, is that we may turn into unnecessary spending, unnecessary time, rehashing things that we already know are not a problem, like revisiting the autism vaccine myth. That has been refuted in multiple large-scale studies, even outside of the United States. And so if we're now spending time doing that, that is funding and time that we could probably use to
For
create
something
autism
else.
resources, to put towards early intervention, to create schools for neurodiverse individuals. And that, I think, is what sits so unwell with myself as someone who's into child health and development, and that we are focusing our energy on so many things that don't need the time or funding when so many other areas could use that time and money.
Yeah, I think a perfect example of this and the vitamin K, injection as part of the prophylactics towards childhood
Yeah.
early bleeding and stuff like that is the casualty of this, right? Because
Yeah.
there's very little risks around it and great protections it offers to your child, and I'll let you speak on it more. But it's unfortunate because even now vitamins have gotten wrapped up into this. I'll let you speak on the importance of vitamin K, and you had some folks on your show about it as well, which I thought was really interesting.
By the way, thank you for giving me this platform to
Of
educate on
course.
evidence-based information. Like, this is such an honor. I mean, I know we're still in the conversation, but kudos to you because there are a lot of big podcasts out there, as you know, both of you, and I'm in this podcast world too. I have my own show that really lend voices to people that should not have platforms. And so thank
Right.
you because I think it's so healthy. Now, to answer that question about vitamin K, it is not even a vaccine. It's a shot. It's a vitamin, but it's got wrapped up into this anti-vax movement because I think it's an injection and because
Right.
it's given early in that newborn period when babies are supposed to be pure and untouched. But let's be honest, and I want to be clear that although babies are pure and untouched and amazing, not everything is perfect in the
Right.
newborn baby, and they need outside intervention sometimes. And this is a prime example of something that they need, right? It's given within hours of birth to prevent a rare but serious condition called vitamin K deficiency bleeding. And I have seen vitamin K deficiency bleeding. So going back into the research experience combination, these are babies who were under 4 months of age, whose parents did not give the vitamin K, the mothers were breastfeeding, and the children came in with bleeds in the brain, and the other child had two patients in residency, and the other child had bleeds all throughout the spinal column. These are kids that now needed to be intubated, that now needed to have a lot of developmental help to now reach milestones that they probably could have reached had they not had those bleeds. And as a
Right.
mother of a child who had a stroke and seizures at delivery, I am someone who will say that that is a hard thing to witness, that is a hard thing to go through. And if we can do things to prevent serious illness or serious disease, we should do it. And benefits far outweigh risk. I mean, it's getting really wild as to what the claims are, and clinicians out there that are, spreading misinformation, just to elevate their voice and sell supplements and sell things.
Right.
This is true disinformation at its finest, that they know that they're probably doing something wrong, but that they're making money off of it. I don't make any money off of telling you all on this podcast that you all should get the vitamin K shot, because they're not paying me. And I'm just trying to keep your kid out of the hospital and keep that baby, that little baby that I will never forget in my PICU rotations, out of my head when I hear of another baby getting admitted to the hospital for vitamin K bleeding. Or vitamin K deficiency bleeding. And that is so concerning to me. And there's just so much mistrust in the medical system. There's so much mistrust in doctors. And we can even talk about that later. But it really comes down to, again, getting this information from valuable resources. The person that came on my show, her name is Jessica Nurek. She's a brilliant PhD in nutrition, and she knows a lot about vitamins. And so we talked all about vitamin K on my show. And it was really, we hashed out a lot of the things. We talked about how the myths are there and debunking all of that, and how sometimes we need to help our babies. And this is a prime example of when babies need external medication or external support to help support them, and not have these bleeding situations, which can be catastrophic. And I don't want that for my patients or anyone listening to the show.
I don't think we can explain the hypocrisy about it, because these are the folks who are hesitant about a vitamin K injection. However, they'll, suggest all kinds of other supplements that you take orally, which, again, we'll just leave it at that.
Vitamin A for measles.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a vitamin. I mean, I get it's an injection versus vitamin A, oral, but it is still safe. And I mean, when I say safe, the benefits outweigh the risk in this situation. But this whole conversation, #hypocrisy. Like, there is so much hypocrisy. And I love that y'all are politically on the opposite, because going back to that point, when you actually break it down, this should not be political.
Right.
Science should not be political, but it has become that. And that is a travesty, like huge travesty, that we have politicized healthcare, that we've politicized public health, because these are all things that should be nonpartisan, that we should say, hey, we both want to keep kids alive and healthy, that listen to the scientists, listen to international respected scientists, not just American scientists, on what makes sense.
The guys that are skipping the vitamin K shot for their baby are sucking down bovine testicles when they get home from the gym. But the reality is, though, that, right, they have best intentions. So even the folks that want to, quote, protect their babies, and that's why I think it's so important when you communicate that you have this validating attitude toward your patient, because, like, they have the right intention. And when you're going to try to disrupt their worldview, that can be very alarming. And that will make them recoil the other direction to a witch doctor, perhaps. So what I would say, and just to further validate these people, and as I move further away from the right, but as I am still representative of such, I just want to say, right, so most pharmaceutical studies would be funded by pharmaceutical companies, I imagine. So how can we know, or how can these hesitant people know when these findings are truly unbiased?
So when they do these studies, and I actually, full transparency, I have worked closely with one pharmaceutical company as a rep for the RSV Beyfortus antibody. So I got to see their whole study. And it was a partnership to talk about RSV advocacy. And I'd love to be transparent about that. It was the one RSV or one vaccine that I've had a partnership with. And I got to see the studies, right? I looked at it in detail. And one thing is that those studies have to be done in trials, right? There's phase 1, there's phase 2, there's phase 3. They have to do it because the funding has to come from somewhere. They have to pay the participants. I have actually organized research studies. Before going to medical school, I was actually the project manager of a research study at UCLA, managing how meditation impacts HIV/AIDS patients and how it impacts aging. And we did that was my life for 5 years in undergrad. And it is a lot of money and a lot of time to do a research study, especially vaccine research, because of the amount of patients in the studies, the amount of steps included, and the amount of people that need to run the study. So number one is that there are many phases that happen in those studies, and those patients are monitored for years after. It's not like they go into the study and it's like, bye, see ya. It's monitoring. And being a privy to the research was very fascinating. And then the second step is those ACIP meetings. The ACIP was that Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. There's been a lot of concern now with who's representing that panel, but prior to June, I would say, when it was the old committee. That was the brightest minds in public health, pediatrics, immunology, all of the things that we would want to decide our vaccines. And they are the ones that have the pharmaceutical companies sit there, and they all have to divulge whether they have any pharmaceutical ties. They cannot have taken any money from pharma. And they sit there and they listen to what the pharmaceutical companies have to say about the studies. And they dissect the studies. They look at, well, is this really necessary? And how I know this is when I said again that I sat in for the COVID one for children. And I was expecting like, okay, sounds good. Let's approve it. I mean, they dug in. They're like, do we really need this? Let's talk about the myocarditis. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about X, Y, and Z. And that is how I want people to know that this process doesn't happen overnight. When they decide that they're creating a vaccine, it's 7 years in the making. And then even after that, it's all the time it takes to do the study. And even after that, it's the team and committees that sit there, listen for hours on, does this make sense to release into the population that we want to give this to, right? And they're not going to do that unless they look at what I just mentioned, that the benefit clearly outweighs risks. And then they're going to revisit things like the Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine that caused blood clots.
Yes.
It was still rare when you consider that COVID itself caused blood clots. Okay, let's be clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
But when they saw that the COVID vaccine, Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine, was causing blood clots more than the Pfizer one or Moderna, their thought was, well, look, if the benefit's not outweighing the risk when we have two other good options, that this is not happening for. And they took it off the market. This is an example of evidence-based and exposure-based clinical decision-making, right? And that is what we're always doing as pediatricians. If we ever saw that there was a vaccine that was causing a trend in our patients, and that is why when people are saying like, my kid had this, and I'm like, I swear I'm not seeing that, and I'm not lying. Like I work for the largest pediatric practice in the United States, and we would talk about it to everyone. We would spread it in our emails like, hey guys, we're seeing X, Y, and Z. Like this is highly concerning, but we're not. And that is when I'm like, are we truthful here? Like, I want to believe you because I don't want to gaslight you, but you can't lie because this doesn't help us have good evidence-based monitoring of vaccines. And so I want everyone to understand that this process doesn't stop when the vaccine comes on the market. It doesn't stop when they come up with the idea. It's a lifelong of this vaccine on the market that they are constantly looking at the benefit. They're looking at what's happening to the patients. They're looking at VAERS. They're looking at pediatricians sounding alarms, which we did back in the 90s with the rotavirus vaccine when it was causing intussusception, which is like the intestines going in and out of each other. And they took that off the market and created a new one. So this is, again, checks and balances that is so healthy, and what is part of my job as a practicing clinician to always be looking at trends, right? And if I saw that, I would be like, hey guys, we need to talk about this because that's the last thing I want for my patients, anything that would cause them physical harm or developmental concern in any shape or form. And that is something I want every parent to understand.
I think also folks have this misconception, and that's probably part of it, is conflicts of interests
Yes.
or financial incentives that you are allegedly receiving. Again, air quotes for our audio only listeners. They have this idea that the pharmaceutical companies are paying you per shot to make sure that they get every one of those vaccines because it's actually a financial incentive. And maybe you could speak a little bit on that, as that's not necessarily per shot. Sometimes maybe it's for a program for overall wellness of your patients, and it's not necessarily pushing these vaccines. But I'll let the words come from your mouth.
Oh my gosh. You know what's so hard and what gets most pediatricians very upset is that pediatricians are the lowest paid clinicians in the world. Okay.
Right.
We make very little money as it is. Okay. So if that was true, I'm just using common sense. If that was true that we would get paid per shot of the vaccines that we give, that means that we would be making more than plastic surgeons, more than dermatologists, more than all those doctors that make way more money than we do. So when we hear that, it's very demoralizing because we literally are trying to do preventative medicine, which doesn't get a lot of money in America, right?
Right.
Preventative medicine is not where money goes. It's treatment. And that's the sad reality. And, I just want to, even RFK Jr. was talking about like that everyone should start wearing wearables. Like, wearables are where you can monitor all of your stuff. That's a corporate company making those wearables. We don't
Yeah.
need that. Like, that's not preventative medicine. That's money making. Like, that is money making. Like, you are now promoting something that people are now going to have to buy. Like, as pediatricians, we give vaccines, and there is incentive to meet certain quotas for evidence-based practices in preventative medicine. So vaccines are considered preventative care for insurance companies. So if practices do vaccinate, there are incentive bonuses that are given to the practice, not per individual doctor, but that literally covers the cost of housing and supplying the vaccines. We don't get that. Like if I were to show you my paycheck, there's no item line that says Dr. Mona's vaccines for the month.
Vaccine bonus.
Yes, there's none of that. All I get is my paycheck and money taken out for my vision, dental, and my
Right.
health insurance and my 401k, whatever that is. But that's not there, And I don't want to be showing anyone my pay stub, but literally, I mean, I think I might have to at some point because I'm like, guys, what do you want? And they're gonna be like, she made it up. It's not real. It's there. Like there's nothing extra that we get. And
So I think folks just need to follow the line of logic, right? Be it the
Yes.
government or these insurance companies, right? Insurance companies, they want you to be alive as long as possible, paying your premiums, right? So there's no
Yes.
incentive to poison you with these things. Or I always joke too, I was like, the government's not trying to harm you. They want you alive forever so they could tax you and just for year
Exactly.
after year. So it's
Yeah, well, they want us to be their little subdued worker bees,
Yes.
right? With the
corporate
fluorine in
America,
them.
they want us to
Exactly.
buy wearables. I mean, why would we?
Yeah.
Why would we vaccinate? Like
They
if
don't-
vaccines were harmful,
they
we
don't want
wouldn't be
to put
able
us
to
in
buy
the grave that
wearables.
early. Exactly. They just around buying stuff as long as possible.
Yeah.
All right, listen, let's change gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about milestones. So
Yes.
my son will be turning 2 in October, and he's the oldest of, I'll say, 4 or 5 other cohort of babies that are in my friend group. And we're very lucky to have that many peers. But what I noticed was as he was getting to be 14, 15, 16 months, he still wasn't walking. And he
Mhm.
was crawling at an absurdly quick rate. We called him high-speed chase. And now he's walking just as normal. It happened actually at 18 months, but it was much later than some of his peers. And so I was feeling really personally self-conscious about it, saying to my wife, we need to give him more opportunities. We need to help him practice. We messed up. We were using a walker back when he was 8 months. And so I'm wondering if you could tell me, do you think that, and you could be as brutally honest as you want, was this our doing and our fault from not giving him enough opportunities in a little bit of a way? Or is it just that, hey, he was focused more on walking or talking and drawing, and he didn't bother with walking just yet?
My first question for you is that did you need to do any intervention, meaning physical therapy, or he just started walking on his own?
We did not do the
Yeah.
intervention. We were
Yes.
1 month off from the
And that's-
pediatrician recommending
And for
that.
anyone listening, the age of like, hey, we need to refer is usually 18 months for not walking.
Yeah.
So you all just made it. But before then, speaking about a milestone, I'm looking at any precursor to that, right? So if a child's coming in at 15 months, I'm looking at, are they trying to move in any way? So crawling, are they pulling to stand? These are all things that I might be, cruising on objects. And have they just become more reliant or more just building their confidence, which some kids are just building their confidence with walking. And so it is so easy when a child is not meeting a milestone for us to go back and blame ourselves. And I really want to, this is actually my honest answer, not because I'm on your show and I'm nice, but my honest answer is we can't go back into the past, whatever that answer is, right? So even if, sure, could that walker have delayed something? Yes, but not for 5 months, okay? Like maybe it gave him a little bit more reliance on the walker and he didn't gain that confidence, but it's not like y'all were like living on the walker. I mean, he still had other opportunities. So I really caution parents when they get diagnosed with some sort of delay, whether it's motor, speech, cognitive. It is so easy to go into the what ifs. And I did that with my son when he was born with the stroke, right? What happened? Like, is it and I had a traumatic delivery, but oh, we shouldn't have had this doctor, or I should have trusted my gut and like listened and done that. I mean, it's so easy to do all of that to ourselves. And that's human nature. But now the only thing we can do is how can we make that child thrive in the present? And with my son as an example with the stroke and seizures, I was on his development like a hawk because with stroke and seizures,
Right,
there is a risk of developmental concerns, right? So I was on his milestones. If he wasn't meeting anything in the slightest, mommy pediatrician was like, okay. And I had some degree of milestone anxiety. And when he wasn't speaking at 18 months, like a lot of my patients, we were that close to calling the speech therapist. I made
Right.
the appointment, and then lo and behold, 2 days later, speech milestones started to blossom, right? And may that happen to everybody? No. But the most important thing is to remember that every child's on their own trajectory, that
Yep.
even if someone does tell you, and it may be a pediatrician one day, it may be some non-nice family member that says, you know what, you didn't breastfeed your baby, or it's because you put them in daycare, or it's because you sleep trained, or it's because you did X, Y, or Z, and I told you not to use the walker. It is so important as a parent to tell yourself, I knew what I knew at that moment. And I did what I did with the resources and time that I had. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the information and resources I have now. And that is the only way we can get through that, right? Because to live in the past and to perseverate about the future does nothing for us. So to be more mindful is, my son has a stroke. My son has a seizure. Your son, Cooper, is not walking. What am I going to do now to foster that walking? And hopefully that means having these really meaningful conversations with friends and clinicians that can foster that and say, you know what, here's why I'm concerned, or here's why I'm not. Here's how we're going to help him walk. Here's what we're going to do. Give him some time to just trial and error. Put him up and let him fall down and let him feel how it feels to fall and get back up. When he does get up, clap.
Yeah.
When he falls, clap. Like, get him used to that, right? So that he feels that confidence. And when he gets there, you're going to use that walker again. That's okay, like the push walker. But that is such a common feeling. But no, you did not cause your child's delay. And I want to say that because I do also educate about don't do this, all that. But I always tell my families, I'm like, you could do all of the check marks that I tell you. You could do everything. And your child can still have a delay. And it's not your child. It's sometimes their brain development. And if we kept placing guilt on ourselves, we would never get the kid the help that they need, right? Because we'd be living in such shame and guilt that you wouldn't say, you know what? My kid's not walking. It's not my fault. I need to go now get help. And I want parents not to live in shame or guilt, because that just is not a fun place to be whenever we want to get help for our children.
The other thing that kind of helped me get over the mental hump, and he's running now, so it's all good. But it was like it was discovering that he had his own personality, and that when you look online, when you look at the baby books, when you talk to people, and even at the pediatrician at times, it's very cookie cutter, right? It's a checklist. Is he walking at 16 months? Yes or no? And you feel like, oh, well, he didn't fit into that cookie cutter mold. So what's going on? But as I saw him trying to walk and learning to walk and doing these practices, it was very cool to see, oh, my baby is just a bit more cautious. Like, he's probably fallen once or twice and knows I don't want to keep falling. So I'm not going to stand up, and I'm not going to fall if I don't stand up. So it was cool to see that slow progression. And then the other babies that don't care about falling and just run and fall right on their face into a table, and they're okay with that too. So it's like very interesting. I'm actually really nervous because they always say the second baby's a little different than the first. So maybe we're going to have a bit of a harder time. But I know, Mike, you're working on eating now with the baby, right? What are some of the challenges you've had?
So I do want to I want to round the circle here. Are you familiar with the show Bluey? Is that something you guys watch in your household?
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. We went through a Bluey phase where that soundtrack lives rent free in my head. And so,
absolutely.
We loved it for a very long time. Mike. Are
you familiar with the episode Baby Race?
Yes, of course, Baby Race.
And I don't know what it is. There's something at the episode. There's always something that gets in my eye, and it just starts watering. It's the craziest thing.
What flew in there? I have no idea. When he starts walking towards our mommy, come on.
I think that encapsulates it perfectly. Is because that's what I do too. Is you worry and you unfortunately live too much in the past about what you could have done better. But I think that's really why I enjoy a lot of your content. Is not only for the practical advice, but it's always to remind me that I just need to be trying my best. There is no best. It's about being there, being present. And you just shared it. I think it might have been today, or at least it got into my algorithm just recently. It was a foreign language commercial, but it was about a dad doing his dorky little dance for his son. And then the son, his whole life rolling his eyes like, oh, Dad, you're such a weirdo. You're embarrassing me in public. And then sure enough, one day when he has his son, he's doing the dorky little dance with him at Christmas. And I'm like, I think about all the stuff that my dad did. And I used to say the same thing, like, oh, Dad, you're embarrassing me. Now that I'm a dad, I'm like, I can't wait to embarrass my son.
But, I love that video. You're right. I'm like crying. I'm like, it's just so beautiful because I love kids. I love being a mom. It's hard as heck, as you both know, right? It's not easy. We literally, before we recorded this podcast, bedtime was a disaster. I know how that goes. And also because we were recording, I was like in a little bit of a rush, and my son senses that. He's like, oh, mommy has to go somewhere. Like, what's she in a rush for? And it was push back, push back. And even on those days, I'm like, I look at pictures of them, as we know, and you're just like, damn it, you're like so amazing. And like Cooper said, I get to be privy to this development. I get to watch you blossom and learn things. And as hard as it is when you can start to look at all the good things that they do and like just remember that at the end of the day, you can remember the bad, but choose to remember the good things.
Right.
And don't forget the bad because they existed. I'm not trying to build toxic positivity, but as you close your eyes, think, God, it was so hard, but damn, they're so cute. And when she held my finger, or when she looked at me and said, Mama, or, when your sons, are like just fighting something, sleep or whatever, and are walking towards you for the first time, those images just are so pure and lovely. And it's the beautiful thing about parenting. And it's why I love that video, because joy, humor, bringing down the stress when you're feeling stress is such a skill. Like when you are feeling this, you need to tell yourself the only way this stress is going to go, like when you're tense, is escalating. So you need to think, what can I do to bring humor, joy, or levity to calm this energy down? And that's that video, right? That dad just always is happy and joyful. And, he brought that. And even when his son was rolling his eyes, and it sits with our kids. I want my kid to remember that mommy was happy and joyful when I was with her. Not the 10 times that I've yelled in the past 2 weeks, but
Right.
by and large, she was happy in my presence. And God, I'm happy in their presence. And that's what I want for families, that they shouldn't be our burden. They should be something that we love and feel fulfilled to have these children.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I try to take that with me because now it's my turn to kind of ask the advice while I got a doctor, lassoed in here. We're doing the feeding things, and
Yeah.
my son, for perspective, just turned 10 months yesterday. So my wife, very type A as well, huge fan of your show. So it's going to be funny when I tell her about that. We're very concerned, like, oh, he's not moving on to solids fast enough. And you look at the internet and it'll be like, these 3-course meals that they have, their vegetable, their starch, and their protein separated. And I'm like, I'm lucky if I can get most of the puree container down, without it being all over the place, right? So I guess my question to you is, am I stressing too much about purees? He is slowly incorporating solids. Am I feeling too guilty that, he's not eating asparagus spears and filet mignon at this point in his development?
And you both have one child each, right?
That's correct.
Yes. And so you brought it, I think, Cooper, you're the one who said, you're going to have, if you have a second child, they're going to give you a run for your money, or they're going to be complete opposite.
Yes.
I have 2 kids. And that's exactly, you're going to see a blend, right? One of them may be just by temperament a really enjoyable eater. One of them, like your son, Michael, may be like, I don't know about this, softer food situation.
Right.
From a developmental standpoint, by 10 months, I would love for them to be exploring something that's not just puree. Even if it's a puff, even
Yep.
if it's
We
like
got the puffs
something
going,
that's
yeah.
something that's not just soft. It has to be something that they can pick up and that dissolves, or they can squish. That's really important to me from a developmental standpoint. So if they're not doing that, we need to figure out, okay, let's get some help, because they should be going past purees by 10 months.
Okay.
Now, the speed of how this should happen, every kid is different. My son just took to it. He was like, let's go, Mom.
Yep.
I want to do this baby-led weaning. My daughter would gag and gag. And
Okay.
it was so stressful
Yeah.
that I didn't do baby-led weaning with her until a little bit later, than I did with my son.
Okay.
And now she's the way better eater. Like if you look at what she's eating.
Mhm.
And you could say at that moment, my son was the better eater because he was eating, like chicken and all this stuff at 7 or 9 months. But then my daughter, it took her a little longer. So my advice is, we shouldn't dismiss and say it doesn't matter. Don't offer the soft foods. Wait. It should be, hey, keep that incorporation going. But if there's no advancement, let's see what we can do. But also don't stress every meal, because meals should be enjoyable. They should be.
Right.
I mean, they tend to be full of stress, especially for type A people, because of the mess,
Right.
looking at volumes,
Yep.
all of that. I was that person with my son. But you start to hopefully lay off of that, because you're like, I need to focus on the big picture. Let me zoom out. My kid in the last week explored and ate a steamed carrot. Not like day by day, but look out in the past week versus the minutia. Because when we focus on the minutia, that's when we can start to feel like our kids are failing us, when in reality, they may be making progress week by week and not
Right.
always day by day. And that is what we should be looking at, right? Like that big picture of, yeah, we did this. Like he wasn't doing this and now he's doing this, and maybe he ate or maybe he smelled it, maybe he played with it. All of that is exposure, you know? It's not just like consuming an entire plate and eating like a fillet or eating like some sort of, chicken bone, which my daughter did really well. My son never did. And so kids are unique, but it's important to know what's normal, what's abnormal, when to get help, and feeling comfortable, like I said earlier, on getting assistance if you're like, you know what? He's 11 months. He only wants to eat puree pouches. He only wants to eat puree. Maybe it's time that I talk to someone so that we really can get that going with like a feeding therapist. And that is how we get the help for that child, right? Because then everyone's happier because there's not stress, there's no guilt, there's babies sometimes need help, and sometimes it comes in the form of medication, vaccines. Sometimes it comes in the form of a feeding therapist, and that's really important to remember.
So thank you. You definitely
Yes.
assuaged a lot of my concerns. I feel so much better. We've started with like puffs like about 2 weeks ago, and now he's taking more pieces on and he's using the pincer grip and stuff
Yes, I
like
love
that.
that.
And today he grabbed some rice and beans off of his plate. So I was like, okay. So now they make me feel better that we're like
Baby steps.
we're in the right trajectory. So things are looking good then. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Another thing I like that my pediatrician told us was we were concerned he wasn't eating meat. He was reaching for the vegetables, which, hey, it's a good thing. But
Yeah.
wait, is he getting enough protein? The doctor was kind of saying, like, think of it less of what he eats in a day and think of it more of what he eats in a week.
Yes.
And it kind of put
Yeah.
me at ease because, okay, if he only wants to eat bread today, so be it. He'll eat the vegetables the next day and the meat the day after that, and everything will come symbiotic at the end. But Dr. Mona, we're wrapping up here, but one thing I just wanted you to answer quickly, if over the last 10 years of your experience, can you talk to us a little bit about the engagement of dads in your practice and with their kids? Everyone says the millennial dad is the most
Yeah.
engaged, and we are lucky enough, Mike and I, to work from home, him probably a little more than me, but I do more than half the week, and I get to see the kid every day, every single day,
I
every
love that.
morning, every lunch, and every night. We do bath time and bedtime together every single day, my wife and I, and that's just not the case for still a lot of dads or moms, but I think in the olden days, they were used to seeing their kids on weekends or not even that. And I'm wondering if you've seen this shift, or is it just perceived, and is it a good thing?
It
Or
is absolutely a phenomenal thing, right? And I have seen it in my office as well. Like, it used to be, and again, I've been practicing for 10 years, it used to be a very highly mom alone predominant visit. And
Right.
then I see mom and dad a lot more now, which is awesome because, again, maybe job flexibility. And I want to be very clear that it's what a privilege that we have. And I look at it as a privilege because I also, too, have a very flexible job that I can see my kids morning, middle of the day, night, pick up my son,
Yes.
drop my son off to school. Like, that is not something my parents always got to do as immigrant parents making it work. And so I know that as a privilege, and I never will forget that. And then I also see dads bringing in their kids solo, which I equally love. And there is still that sort of not stigma, that sort of oh wow, dad's here, and I've had
Right.
to squash that because yes, there are the dads that are like, I have no idea, mom gave me the list, and here's what I need to tell you, and I don't, and I'm always like, thank you for being here, tell me the list. Like, I don't care that he has to look at mom's notes, it's fine. And then there are the
Right.
dads that are like, oh no, I'll call mom, no big deal. And I love that transition, right? I look at my own husband who grew up in a family where he rarely even spoke to his father. Like, that sounds awful. Like,
Right.
his dad was working, owned a business, but he doesn't have very fond memories with his dad. And now he's with the kids at the park at 3:30, like rolling around on the turf, taking them to Barnes and Nobles or doing projects with them. And it is such a benefit, if we are lucky enough to have a partner, be in a heterosexual, homosexual, I don't care what kind of relationship you're in, and you have two partners that can be equally involved in that child's life, it is awesome. For not only for looking at you guys married to women, like, not only for the moms who tend to take on more of that mental load we talk about, that, having to do all of the things, now having dad just say, hey, let's go, pick it up and let's take the kids out. And maybe mom is doing more of like the signing up for daycare or all the logistical stuff that she may be better at or like to do, whatever. But to have that equalness, to have that child, have that presence is so awesome. And I don't want any listener to feel that if they're not able to give that because of their job circumstances, because they work full time out of the home, that they are depriving their child in any way. Because then it comes down to, what are you bringing when you are present, right? We talk about the quality of time versus quantity. I used to work full time in an office. I didn't have that with my son. My son and I are still very simpatico. I tell him, I use that word. I'm like, we're two peas in a pod. Like, this kid is obsessed with me. And like, we had majority of his life that I wasn't always there, right? But it's because when I was with him, it was very much with him. Cell phones off, connected, and you can still build a healthy relationship, but it's about how you're showing up. Whether you're a mom, whether you're a dad, what is it that you want your child to remember you for? And again, I go back to that. My son says, I'm so silly. How lovely to be an educated professional who does speaking engagements, has like a lot of, like that millions of people around the world listen to me. And the thing that my son remembers about me is that I'm a silly mommy. Like it is pure gold in my heart to be the
Right.
silly mommy. And it doesn't mean that I don't hold boundaries, but it means that he knows me as this jovial woman who's dancing in the kitchen, who does goofy dance moves, who like booty bumps my butt into his face, which is he thinks is so funny when we're listening to like, reggaeton or something. He thinks it's so funny.
That's
And
too
he's like,
cute.
Mommy, you're the silliest goose ever. And I'm like, I hope I'm the silliest goose forever in your life. Like,
Right.
I love that. And that is what it comes down to, right? What is the moments that you want to bring? What is it that you want your child to remember you for? And for me, it's that mommy tried hard, mommy repaired when I yelled, and that mommy was silly and loved spending time with you when I could. And it's okay that I work 70, 80 hours a week on my business. I am very much present with my kids when I do have the time with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that does it for me. I mean, we didn't get to talk about screen time, which is something
So
you
much.
talk a
We
lot
could do
about
part
on your
2.
channel.
Yeah.
But yeah, what I'm going to do is link a lot of your materials and all of that. But this is your opportunity, Dr. Mona, to kind of say, where can people find you? Where do you want people to connect with you? On what platforms? And we're going to link it all below, whatever you say. So
Yeah, so Instagram is where all of it happens. Peds Doc Talk, Peds PEDSDOCTALK. My podcast is very big parenting podcast in the United States. Same name, the Peds Doc Talk podcast. The website, pedsdoctalk.com. And my YouTube channel is actually growing. I have a lot of free evergreen content there, which people are starting to really find and love. And that's Peds Doc Talk. So drill that into your name, Peds Doc Talk. Search Google when you're searching for videos. Just say Peds Doc Talk biting, and I'm sure one of the videos will come up that I've done. I have a lot of content spanning health, development, and parenting that, again, like you both said, thank you, is I hope to be very tangible, relatable, and applicable and not overwhelming, right? Here's the problem. Here's why it happens. Here's what you're going to do. That's my formula for
Digestible.
every video. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank
Mike,
you.
was there one more thing you wanted to add?
So yeah, there was the one question we had, and you may have seen it from the show notes we had discussed. It's kind of that meme for our audio only listeners. It's the yes, you are all wrong. It's the one person who's kind of surrounded by 1,000 people who seem to have this consensus, but it's not necessarily based on evidence or rational thought. What is the one thing that you seem to be just constantly challenging it, be it in your practice or your personal life? It's just that one piece of misinformation that just won't die, and you just can't seem to get rid of it.
It's the autism vaccine myth. I mean, again, not everyone feels it, but the ones who feel it are so doubling down on it.
Right.
And it really pains me because for someone who's a neurodiverse advocate, someone who really I take care of a lot of autism families and a lot of ADHD families, to think that you could say that something caused that when we know it's genetically based is really hard to hear. And so that's something that I'm just like, oh. And then the other one is about sleep training being harmful, which I know we didn't even get into. You don't have to sleep train your baby. It's not something required. But my babies are both sleep trained. And my husband's like, God, I thank the day that I married you because our kids are phenomenal sleepers because of mommy's, let's do this. When do we go in? Okay, to stay back, let's go in. Like all of that stuff was by design. And that is one myth I want to squash because I want people to be healthy and get vaccines, and I want people to be able to sleep if that's what they want to do with their baby.
In the toxic masculinity manosphere, that's another thing that's floating is the sleep training is don't let the baby cry. That goes against your ancestral
That's going out?
instincts.
Oh,
yes,
wow.
that's something that you'll see in
they hooked it up. Everyone's latching onto that. Oh, man.
Yeah.
I know we didn't get to chat about that, but that is
so
something.
letting them cry it out is okay.
Yes, but let's say, like, when we talk about cry it out, there's so many different ways, but I am a big fan of Ferber, which is like you wait a certain time, leave, come back in, because from a separation anxiety standpoint, they know you're coming back, and you increase intervals. I did do a full-on cry it out for my son. I'm maybe some of your listeners may be horrified, but it's what we knew was best for him. We tried a Ferber. Every time I went in there, he would scream his bloody eyes out. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try not going in. And it actually worked better for him. 3 nights, stopped crying, meaning he was fine, looked at me with love and attention when I picked him up in the morning, completely securely attached, like I mentioned, loves his mom, won't leave my shadow. Like, it's literally the best situation. And then, so not only from personal experience, but from the families that I help, when it is something that they want to do, Not every family has to, but they have been like, Dr. Mona, I don't know why I waited so long. Thank you so much. And I'm like, I got you. Like, I'm here. I want you to sleep. I want you to be healthy. We're here in this together.
Like they say, right? Happy parents, happy family, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's that same dilemma though, right? Is they have the good intention. Like it was tough for me personally to listen to him crying throughout the
Yeah.
door and not be able to go through it. I'm like, he's in pain, but
I
you
know.
got to remind yourself he's safe and this is what's actually best. So
And it is, and in some babies, like I said, like I always tell my families when I talk about, I'm like, if you get to a point in that night that you feel like something's concerning, even if you have the monitor on and you're looking,
Right.
go. Like, go, see, reassure yourself, and start again. Like, let's do this again. There's no one that's telling you that if you went in, you ruined your baby. You can take a break. And that's the thing, right? There's no like steadfast rule. And like that misconception that we have to stick to this and do this and we can't pivot. Like, I want to squash that. Parenting is all about pivoting. It's
Oh, yeah.
figuring what is going on. What am I going to do now that's not in a textbook? Like and
Yeah.
that's the art of parenting. And I love that. Like so many situations where I've not learned ever. No one told me, but I figure it out based on my values and principles that here's how we're going to approach this. And then it works. And you're like, yeah, I did it. Yeah.
When you finally crack the code on your kids.
Yes, I love
Right.
Because
cracking
every kid is
codes.
different, exactly, right?
Yes.
You could take the
Yeah.
advice, you could take, evidence-based practices and things like that, but then you got to figure out what works for your kid or kids, right? That's all a little bit different. It's the special secret sauce that you got to figure out.
Yeah.
Well, a big thank you, Dr. Mona Amin. Thank you again for joining us. This has been Elevated Thoughts.